Everyone, thanks for joining. We're going to get started here in just a minute. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to ISAP's 2024 Risk Management Conference, our three-part webinar series to future-proof your farm. You are joining us for our final installment, week 3, where we're focusing on sustainability metrics in the supply chain. If you missed the previous sessions, we are recording all of the webinars for future viewing on ISAP's website, and you might have gotten a notification as you came into the room today that we are recording this session as well. My name is Megan Baskerville. I'm the Illinois Ag Program Director for the Nature Conservancy and Vice President of the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, or ISAP, as we call it. ISAP is a coalition of 15 member organizations working to improve soil health and water quality by promoting the adoption of conservation cropping systems. You can see all 15 members' individual logos up on what I call our NASCAR slide. But we formed back in 2017, really in response to Illinois' nutrient loss reduction strategy. And we focus on providing technical, pragmatic resources to Illinois' farmers and crop advisors on best practices to reduce nutrient losses and meet sustainability goals across Illinois' 20 million plus acres of ag land. For today's webinar series, I am joined by ISAP colleagues Frank Rademacher, who will meet in a bit, Rachel Lechuga and Helen Van Beck, who are running slides and tech troubleshooting behind the scenes, and Tori Colburn, who will moderate today's Q&A session. I will do some short commercials though before we get on some resources. So besides today's conference, there's multiple ways that you can stay plugged in to ISAP's resources. And first up here is our newsletter, The Aggregate. So we publish this monthly, and it includes upcoming events, learning opportunities, job openings, and technical resources. So you can sign up there on ISAP's website, and we'll also drop the info in the chat box for you. We also host ICON, or the Illinois Cover Crop On-Farm Network. And this is a community of practice for crop advisors to really share their perspectives kind of in a peer network one-on-one from the field as they work with clients to implement cover crops across the state. We're currently in the midst of an ICON summer series on weeds, diseases, and pests. So, a cheerful summer event. So there's one more to go in that, and you can sign up to be a part of that community of practice as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Frank, who will get us going on today's subject matter.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Good morning again, everybody, and welcome to the ISAP 2024 Risk Management Conference. My name is Frank Rademacher. I'm the Conservation Agronomist for the Nature Conservancy in Illinois. ISAP holds this webinar series every other year, and we try to highlight how conservation practices can help serve you and mitigate production risk. So today, again, we're joined by Helen and Rachel from AFT, who are going to help run things behind the scenes, and Tori from AFT, who's going to help with some of the Q&A sessions. And again, huge thanks to that team for making this happen. So as we've kind of already talked about, this year's theme is Future-Proof Your Farm. And this session is going to specifically deal with sustainability in the supply chain. And so, as I've mentioned in past conferences, in addition to my role at the Nature Conservancy, I also farm with my father in East Central Illinois. And so even in the relatively short time that I've been farming, around 10 years now, it seems like there's really been an explosion of grain end users who have come out with sustainability metrics, goals, programs, and the like. And while it seems kind of like that messaging kind of just came out of nowhere, it was clearly the product of several years of conversations internally and a lot of work, and conversations that are still going on now for the future of supply chain. So given the just huge importance that grain markets have and how they work on the success of farmers, I think a really important but overlooked aspect of resilience is really how farmers adapt to changing market pressures. A lot of times these pressures are really pushing them towards more conservation outcomes. So rather than talk about today, highlight just current programs, what you can get to do cover crops like you would normally hear at a lot of events. We wanted to go a little deeper today, and so we invited two representatives of some grain end users, Pepsi and an ADM, to really give a comprehensive talk on the past, present, and future of grain supply chain sustainability and what that looks like in regard to sourcing, on-farm traceability, and more. So let's see here. So I will go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Caitlin, while I'm doing that, you can go ahead and share your slides. And then after that, you can go ahead and get going. So we're going to hear first from Caitlin Colgrove. She is the lead from North America's PepsiCo Positive Work on Agriculture. She is the business engagement lead for the internal and external positive agriculture initiatives and partnerships that they have established to support the food and beverage business in delivery of their positive ag goals. And so all of that is to secure a supply of sustainably and regeneratively grown ingredients to fuel the growth of the business. Her experience has spanned NGOs, socially responsible investing, and the private sector. Prior to her role at PepsiCo, she led sustainable agriculture work on Target's responsible sourcing and sustainability team, covering topics such as palm oil sustainability, seafood sustainability, animal welfare, and regenerative ag. She's passionate about advancing ambitious goals through a company's supply chain in a way that is pragmatic and brings value and resilience to the business. She holds a BA from Colby College and a master's in international business and trade from Fletcher School at Tufts University. Caitlin resides in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with her husband, son, and a rescue mutt. So go ahead, Caitlin. We appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Frank, and thanks so much to the ISAP team for having me, and thanks everybody for joining for the conversation today. Looking forward to questions that folks have. I know we've got time at the end to just really, have a bit more of a conversation and dig in, but just to call out right at the top, like no question is a bad question, and super curious for anything that people want to kind of dive deeper into. I'm going to just give you all a little bit of background on kind of how we think about agriculture and sustainability at PepsiCo, why we're making some big investments and why we've set some big ambitions out there. And then just share a little bit about like how we're doing this work and how it actually comes to life. Before I do that, I wanted to just kind of step back and really call out the fact that, in addition to the work that we're doing focused on agriculture, which of course will really be the focus of what I'll chat about today, we of course really start with what we're doing kind of within our own four walls, so to speak, right? And all of the places that we're operating around the world. And so just wanted to give a couple of examples on this slide of some of the things that we're doing as a company to really, diminish and also have positive impacts on the overall impact that we have as a company directly through all the products that we sell and all of those processes that it takes to get all those beverages and all those snacks and all those things to shelf. So a ton of work underway within everything that we're doing directly as a company, in addition to everything happening in all the ways that we're looking to collaborate with others in the agricultural part of our supply chain as well. And happy to chat if there's questions about kind of any of this work. But we're here today to talk specifically about agriculture. So I'm going to kind of dive in and chat more about that. So, as Frank mentioned, there's a lot of different goals out there, right, from a lot of different companies. I'm going to try to kind of demystify a little bit today, like what that really means for us as PepsiCo. And you see here kind of some of the high level goals that we've set out around things like sustainable sourcing of our key ingredients globally, really helping to further the adoption of regenerative agriculture practices on 7 million acres, which equates to our full sourcing footprint as a company of key ingredients that we're sourcing, and then also work that we're doing to improve the livelihoods of folks who are in the agricultural supply chain all around the world as well. But stepping back from kind of those specific goals, the reason why we're doing this at the heart is because we are, if you really think about it, we are an agricultural company. So if you think about all of the different products that we sell, those are completely reliant on ingredients, right? That comes from farms. And so our resilience as a business depends on the ability to keep farmers farming and our ability to continue to source, right? All of that, corn that goes into Fritos, all of those potatoes that go into Lay's, so on and so forth. And so it's not just, I think, the right thing to do, which it is, and something that we really believe in as a company. It's something that we really believe is a must do in order to future-proof the business. And we really want to be part of supporting farmers in this transition in a way that really puts the farmer at the center. So I wanted to chat a little bit more kind of on that note about like what our footprint actually looks like when we look at agriculture, and give a little more color to kind of why we've got this imperative, right, to really be supporting our supply chain. So if we look specifically at the US here, we've got, in total about 3.5 million acres of agricultural land in our supply chain that is being farmed, and a variety of key ingredients. We've got more than what's listed on the slide, but the 4 that you see here are kind of key ones. No surprise when we look specifically at Illinois, corn is of course king, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide as well. But yeah, sourcing a lot of different ingredients. And so the way that we're engaging and the regions that we're prioritizing, really investing in, then kind of flow from what our footprint looks like. And I should say too, as PepsiCo, we've got kind of a variety of different relationships with farmers. In some supply chains, we actually have direct grower contracts. So as an example, actually in central Illinois, we've got growers who grow directly for Frito-Lay there, as well as in Nebraska. We've got direct grower relationships in the potato supply chain, as well as in the oat supply chain up in Canada. But then a lot of and really the vast majority of our volumes of a lot of these ingredients that we source are being supplied to us through suppliers, right? And sourced in that kind of indirect model. And so that also really shows up in the way that we approach this work, because we really kind of take a partnership approach, and we really look to engage kind of in that entire region where those ingredients are coming from, because again, we've got that kind of indirect model where we may not necessarily have that direct connection as PepsiCo to that farmer, nor frankly, in many cases, the farmer may not know, right, ultimately where that ingredient that they're growing actually ultimately ends up. But safe to assume, right, based on our volumes, that certain amounts of it are probably making their way into PepsiCo's supply chain within those particular draw areas that we focus on. Now we've got an Illinois crew here today, so wanted to just also share a little bit about specifically what our footprint looks like as a company in Illinois. We've got a significant kind of physical footprint in terms of plants and just overall economic impact to the state, and large number of folks who are employed directly within the state. But then, from an agricultural standpoint, we've also just got a lot of ingredients that we're sourcing from the state. Again, no surprise, as I mentioned earlier, number one by far there is corn. And so that's going to be ingredients, of course, that are going into both the beverage side of the business as well as the food side of the business for Frito-Lay. Think, whole corn and corn grits and corn oils and high fructose corn syrup and all of those kinds of things. And then I wanted to just talk a little bit about sort of what we're actually doing as it relates to regenerative agriculture. Because you saw we've got this overall ambition around advancing regenerative agriculture practices and really doing what we can, right, to keep farmers farming, right? For us, I know these terms, right, can kind of mean lots of different things. They've kind of become buzzwords. It's really about, this kind of a set of overall principles, that connect to these 5 different topic areas that you see here on the slide. And so, we try to employ a lot of flexibility in kind of what exactly those specific practices and approaches look like, depending on the specific region that we're engaging in and the specific cropping system that we're talking about, right? Because we know, if you look at somebody growing corn in Southern Illinois and somebody growing, oats in Northern Saskatchewan, the kind of agronomic realities on the ground are going to look really different. And so it doesn't make sense to have kind of one standardized set of practices. We really work with local partners to ensure that we've developed an approach that's really kind of right-sized and matches up with the needs of farmers in that particular community and what makes sense, right, just within that kind of, for those soils, for the weather patterns in that area, all those kinds of things. But these are the 5 impact areas. We do ask that any kind of program we're running be connected to at least 2 out of these 5 areas. And certainly, with a lot of types of regenerative agricultural practices, many of them just inherently will, of course, hit on multiple impact areas, right, with one practice. And so you see, of course, examples here of things like cover cropping and, I'd say throughout the Midwest, the kind of staple practices that we're primarily seeing folks interested in adopting are reduced tillage, cover cropping, and then nitrogen management as well. But again, varies a little bit depending on kind of the geography that we're talking about and then what the needs are. And then also just wanted to chat a bit about like how we're actually doing this work and some of the things that we've learned along the way as we engage with farmers. So first of all, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, I think we're really humble about where we sit in the supply chain, right? We're further away from field and we are not in this to tell farmers how to farm, right? We are here to be supportive as we can and to help kind of de-risk things that folks are already interested in doing. And so with that, every type of incentive program that we offer is voluntary. We always offer programs on a 1-year basis so that there's flexibility built in, right? We don't want to be kind of locking folks into long-term contracts. We tend to structure our programs as pay for practice programs so that they don't have that requirement of additionality that you sometimes see with some carbon market programs that are out there, because we really think it's important to be able to reward folks who've been kind of at this for a few years, in addition to folks who want to try something new, right, over time. So yeah, some key elements of kind of how we think about this work. And then I'd say too, this is a space for us that's very pre-competitive. So we like to work with partners, within the supply chain. And you'll hear more after this from Paul Sheets from ADM, who we have a really fantastic partnership with. As an example, they're a supplier to us, and they're actually directly implementing some fantastic regenerative ag work that we're supporting. And so that's an amazing example of a supply chain partnership. We also have partnerships with customers on the other side of the supply chain. We've got a large one as an example with Walmart, where they're also co-investing in this work alongside of us and really kind of sharing in the cost, right, of supporting that. But we also collaborate with our competitors within consumer goods companies. And so we look for opportunities to partner with peer companies, and particularly interested in spaces where we can partner where different companies may be sourcing different crops across the rotation in a given area. And so we've got several initiatives where we're kind of collaborating with groups of companies in an entire geography, so that we're really being aligned. And so also so that we're not coming to farmers with kind of slightly different and confusing than offerings, so that we've got kind of one program that's coherent and that we're supporting farmers, across that rotation of things that they're growing in a way that they can count on, and that's consistent and clear. Because we know one of the things that comes up regularly with these programs is like there's a lot of stuff that's out there, and it can be confusing and overwhelming for folks. So we're really trying to do our part to reduce that confusion that's out there. So that's kind of one piece of this. There is no way that we as PepsiCo would be able to do this without working through fantastic partners who are on the ground locally. I mentioned ADM earlier. In the US, we've also got 3 other terrific implementing partners in Soil Water Outcomes Fund, Practical Farmers of Iowa, and Precision Conservation Management right there in Illinois. And I know a member of ISAP as well. And these are all, all 4 of these groups really are key because they are, on the ground in those priority regions that we're focusing on, have those relationships with growers, and are able to provide kind of that year-round support to folks, and really be that kind of ear for the farmer, so that we can ensure that we're evolving over time, right? And really have an offering that fits what farmers actually need and are looking for. And so kind of in that third bucket, also want to call out that the way that our support shows up, again, it's customized kind of by, partner by partner. Each of those 4 partners that you see in the middle have, different approaches, right? In the way that they do this type of work with farmers, different like particular strengths and things that they're fantastic at. But the 3 pillars that we always want to ensure are part of any program that we're supporting are, of course, financial incentives, right? So we're providing a per acre financial incentive for for certain practices, right, within the program. That, of course, that's always there. But then like what's beyond that? So we only want to be partnering with third parties who are providing folks with really solid, unbiased agronomic support, right? So we don't, we really want folks to have what they need throughout that entire growing season and beyond, as they're trying out a new practice, as they're adjusting to what happens, with the weather or other things in that particular growing season. And so the 4 folks that you see listed here are really terrific examples of, who have amazing teams on the ground who are providing that agronomic support. And then the last is that we really think that farmers learn best from other farmers, right? And so how are those partners who we work with providing peer-to-peer learning opportunities, whether it's field days, whether it's mentoring programs, webinars and things like this, just to share learnings and best practices. But again, kind of how this comes to life within each partnership varies a bit, but we're always ensuring that every program we're supporting has got kind of those three elements. We've found that those really make for the most successful long-term, programs. And we've tended to see that farmers have the most success when programs have each of those three elements included in them. So I'll stop there. Really appreciate everybody's attention. I know I'm at time and I want to turn it over to Paul to share more about what ADM is up to. But looking forward to questions from the group.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So yeah, we'll do kind of the same thing. I'll do a quick introduction of Paul, and then yeah, we'll hand it over to him to tell us all about kind of what ADM is doing. Okay, so Paul grew up in West Central Illinois on a family farm and graduated from the U of I with a finance degree in 2010. Paul's current role is the Director of Climate Smart Ag Origination for ADM, where he works with ADM's origination and sales team to design, execute, and manage ADM's North American Regen Ag programs. Prior to Paul's current role, he held various commercial management roles with ADM, where he focused on managing ADM's grain buying and ingredient sales at various processing facilities. Whenever you're ready, Paul, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Frank. Quick mic check here. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, ISAP team, for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of the work that we're doing in the sustainability space. I'm going to expand a little bit on a little bit of my background, also talk about ADM's journey. Since we're kind of uniquely positioned, as Caitlin highlighted, between farmers and either downstream customers and markets, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the trends that we've seen over the last couple of years and what we expect in the next few years as well. Also talk about how we successfully execute satisfying some of these demand trends, then end with what we think future opportunities are for farmers. So as Frank mentioned, I did grow up on a farm, West Central Illinois, Carthage, Illinois. If anybody's familiar with Quincy, Illinois, it tends to be the biggest town around us. It's 45 minutes north of there. My dad, brother, and brother-in-law farm roughly 1,500 acres. They finish out about 30,000 hogs per year as well. I've had a chance for the majority of my career to spend it on the commercial side of ADM. So been a grain buyer in several different capacities throughout Illinois, Missouri, and Iowa. But these last couple of years, I've got a chance to manage our sustainability program. But even prior to that, in Iowa, we got to stand up some of our earliest sustainability programs, which I got a chance to help with. And that's kind of what I wanted to start off with, is just talking about ADM's journey a little bit, because I think it sets the table for kind of where we are today and where we hopefully are going here in the future as well. Our first sustainability program was in 2012. It was in Iowa. I think our first Illinois program was actually in 2015. ADM's been around for 120 years. What we're good at is buying grain, setting delivery periods, quality standards, markets. But one thing we weren't all that familiar with were understanding the complexity of the several different farm decisions that ultimately have to be made at the field, and what environmental impacts those decisions could ultimately have. So we wanted to make sure that we kind of went on this fact-finding mission and be pretty deliberate about ultimately meeting the farmer where they were. So we had a bunch of different programs from 2012 to 2021 where we were just gathering data. Caitlin mentioned a little bit earlier that every supply chain is complex and it's different. So it's kind of hard to just have this like standard regenerative ag definition or sustainability goals and metrics, knowing that how to grow a soybean crop versus a potato versus an edible bean versus corn is significantly different. So we wanted to spend 7 to 10 years just understanding each one of those supply chains and what different actions were being made at the farm. And over that time, we found some pretty strong trends, some pretty cool trends that even existed, obviously, before we had our first program in 2012 around practices that had positive environmental impacts. The big three, and it's not only these three, but the big three tend to be tillage practices, cover crop adoption, and I'm just going to generally say inputs relative to productivity, but the biggest one tends to be fertilizer efficiency. And not only did we find in our pilot projects over those 10 years, but you could see that there's some publicly available information of the good work that all you guys, all farmers are doing, specifically in the US. Whether it's no-till, where I think NASS reported in 1977, there's less than 2 million acres of no-till across the US. That's of 330 million principal crops that were grown. Fast forward to 2017, and NASS reported that there was 102 million acres of no-till annually that was being executed. Cover crops prior to 2001, less than 1 million acres reported. I believe NASS just reported in 2017 that there was 17 million acres, or sorry, 2022, 17 million acres of cover crops. I think it's slightly higher than that, but a significant increase prior to 2000. And then the EPA reported in 1980 that there was 24 million metric tons of fertilizer that was used for commercial use. Fast forward to 2015, and the EPA reported that there was 22 million metric tons of fertilizer that was used for commercial use. So 2 million metric tons less. All at that same time, we doubled the, I say we, because I have a farming background, I'm going to say we, but it's mainly you in this audience, doubled production from 1977 to now of all of your principal crops of corn, soy, and wheat, essentially saying that the environmental impact of farming operations have halved during that time. So we had noticed that there were some really strong trends. One thing that was kind of absent during that time is there wasn't a lot of private participation or coordination through engagement or funding opportunities. So roughly in 2021 to 2022, alongside key partners like PepsiCo and others, we decided to scale up our efforts and, of course, not dictate what farming practices ultimately happen, but hopefully we can add some coordination, some funding assistance as well to accelerate those practices and make the next 40 years look just as good as the previous 40 years had ultimately looked. When it comes to market trends, also, president of one of our business units has a quote that he's been in this industry for roughly 25 years. And the opportunities and the changes in the agriculture industry over the last 2 years have been bigger than what he had seen in the previous 20 years. And the two mega trends that we see that is changing is one's technology, and then the second one is sustainability as well. As we've seen several different market opportunities present themselves. But to start off with, we wanted to make sure that we aligned our sustainability goals from an ADM perspective, both upstream and downstream. Upstream tend to be our suppliers, farmers, third-party grain handlers. Downstream are customers like PepsiCo, other companies as well. And the one thing that we found on that 7 to 10 year journey, even though we're speaking a little different language, we're pretty well saying the same thing. When we would ask farmers to define sustainability, there tend to be two categories that they would answer that question with. One is financial sustainability, which is obviously super critical. And then the second one is whenever a farmer would make an investment in a land, that investment isn't even just for themselves. It's not for their kids, it's for their kids' kids as well. And as Caitlin articulated, our whole business for the last 120 years has depended on the land that you guys all farm, and making sure that we're doing our part in creating funding opportunities and technical assistance opportunities to improve the resiliency of that land was critical. And everybody knows that whenever you're adopting a regenerative agriculture practice for the first time, there's a productivity or a cost concern with it that's related to it. And every acre is slightly different. But the one thing that we have noticed where ADM is uniquely positioned is we're a big enough company that we have visibility into several different markets. Agriculture is so dynamic. The ingredients or the commodities that are produced go into several different markets. They go into the food market, they go into the feed market, they go into the fuel market, even the industrial market as well. And the one thing that we've noticed specifically scale up in the last couple of years is a desire for transparency and an understanding for environmental impact associated with growing those overall commodities. So Caitlin did a great job of highlighting and explaining kind of the food space specifically. I'd lump the feed space in there as well. Tends to be really aligned with what those goals are, even though They are early movers, they are new movers, they understand the agriculture supply chain better than a lot of our other customers. We do see a significant uptick in a lot of other food and feed companies as well, that are looking for the same type of metrics, whether it's around the big four when it comes to field practices. It's usually carbon related, it's biodiversity, it's soil health in the form of soil organic matter or soil erosion. Then it's obviously biodiversity as well. But the amount of inquiries that we've received in the last 12 months about wanting to contribute or financially fund these type of programs has increased significantly versus what it looked like the previous 5 to 10 years. And the other two spaces, fuel and industrial products as well, we are seeing an uptick. Fuel specifically, a lot of the market opportunities tend to be international rather than domestic as of today. You have Europe specifically that has their RED initiative, which is their renewable energy directive, which is around biofuels in the form of biodiesel and ethanol and SAF, that requires sustainability certification, that usually includes information about farming practices being good, legal practices, in the form of competitive wages, good working conditions, but also sustainability practices that are associated with it as well. Domestically, you've had different markets that have presented themselves, and I'll talk about maybe the Inflation Reduction Act a little bit later. But it seems like domestically there will be some more marketing opportunities as well. And then in the industrial space, this tends to be cleaning supplies. This is soybean oil that can go into tires. Agriculture has a story of being less carbon intensive than the ingredient that they're replacing, which is usually a petroleum-based ingredient, through the form of obviously good field level practices as well. So we've seen a significant uptick in industrial demand around agriculture ingredients as well, because of the story of not only what is being done today, but what the opportunity is in future years as well. So that's one that tends to get missed. I alluded to a little bit earlier. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on the Inflation Reduction Act. That tends to be the number one question we get from a lot of producers today of what is it? What is the opportunity in the future? There's a lot of questions that still need to be answered, but for anybody that isn't aware of it today, in the most recent Inflation Reduction Act, there is a biofuel tax incentive opportunity that could create an opportunity to decrease the overall carbon intensity of biofuels and receive a tax incentive associated with it. In the early 2000s, when you had your ethanol boom and your biofuels boom, the biggest reason was for fuel security at that time. But at the same time, you do have a superior carbon intensity product versus the petroleum fuel that other people will use as well. And the Inflation Reduction Act looks like it's going to be the first opportunity that understands that field level practices could potentially reduce the overall carbon intensity score of the biofuel that's produced as well. Again, there's probably more questions than answers today of what model could ultimately be picked, how you score the carbon intensity of the overall fuel. But the first thing that was done was when they did decide on there's two different categories. There's 40B and there's 45Z. 40B is for SAF production and tax incentive opportunities for 2023 and 2024. 45Z will include ethanol, biodiesel, and SAF for biofuel production 2025 through 2027. And the first decision that was made under 40B is that field level scoring can reduce overall carbon intensity scoring. So that Band-Aid was kind of ripped off, which is a positive. That being said, there's a lot of work to do on being able to design programs that are practical and can actually be executed, of which the USDA has submitted a request for information from a lot of different companies on what a successful program could be in practical sense that could be executed at the field level, that essentially turns tax incentives into premium opportunities around the commodities that you grow that ultimately go into biofuel. All that to be said is that in the last couple years, you've just seen this really big uptick from companies like ourselves and PepsiCo, private companies, markets, regulation, governments on being able to commercialize and receive funding that help offset some of the productivity and cost concerns around regenerative agriculture practices. So knowing that from an ADM perspective, we know that we needed to build the infrastructure to be able to capitalize on these opportunities for farmers, for ourselves, for our downstream customers as well. For the most part, our business is pretty integrated. We own a lot of pieces of it, but in this space, it's new, it's still in beta phase, that we needed a bunch of really strong partners to help us successfully execute these programs. We couldn't do it on our own, even though we have a lot of really strong grower partnerships across the US. We needed that technical assistance expertise as well, where you find ourselves partnering with American Farmland Trust in Illinois to not only be able to give funding opportunities, but also all the right resources that make sure that the best practices are ultimately executed. We have the AFT partnership in Illinois, the Ducks Unlimited partnership in Indiana, Michigan, Ohio. We have a Minnesota Soil Health Coalition partnership in Minnesota. We have a Practical Farmers of Iowa partnership in Iowa and Nebraska. We have Kansas Association of Conservation District in Kansas, Flint River Soil and Water Conservation District in our Southeast region, mostly focused on Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And we expect those partnerships to expand at the same time as well. But they have been really, really critical. The coordination has been awesome. These are new partnerships that we haven't had prior to the last few years, and working with a lot of those groups has been phenomenal. And then just to end on what we see as future opportunities for farmers. I think the agriculture supply chain is maybe the most transparent supply chain out of anything compared to iPhones or computers or any other widget you could ultimately buy. You can see what the commodity price is trading at every single day. And a lot of our businesses, the margin is even traded every single day as well. But when it comes to regenerative ag programs or sustainability programs, they're not quite as transparent as what we would like them to be. But I think it's because it's early stages, it's beta phases. There's a lot of companies that are working through what their definitions, what their methodologies, what their models ultimately could be. There's significantly more information thanks to the ISAPs of the world and the American Farmland Trusts of the world today than what there was 2 years ago. But I think that's step number one, is just understanding the different opportunities that you have in your region, whether it's with an ADM regenerations program with Pepsi or one of other Pepsi's programs, or any other program that you could have in the US. Sign up for a program that fits you well. I always say, like, lean on who your trusted advisor could be. That could be an ADM representative, that could be an AFT representative, that could be your ag retail company. I can promise you, anybody that's sitting in a seat similar to me, even back in my grain buying days, they're having a conversation about regenerative ag and sustainable ag, that they should be pretty informed on giving you what different opportunities could exist in each one of your regions. So one is just simple market discovery of understanding the different programs that are out there. Two is just being a little bit more advanced on understanding, or gaining a little bit more education of understanding what field level actions you make could potentially impact some of these sustainability scores. A lot of conversation today is on carbon, but there is the biodiversity, the water quality, the soil health component as well. But at a minimum, education and understanding about if I apply this fertilizer product, what does it do to my overall carbon intensity score? If I plant this cover crop, what could it do to my carbon intensity score? That tends to be what's driving the conversation as much as anything today. And it's new and it's complex, and there are no dumb questions. Because it's something that I've had a chance to be in this space for 5 to 7 years, and it's something that I learn something new every single day as well. That there is a learning curve associated with it, but it does get it very equational. There is an input relative to productivity type of number that you can learn. But I think just understanding your carbon intensity score could create value at the field level as well here over the next years. If the last 2 years are the trend of what we expect to see over the next 3 to 5 years as well. It'll be in more demand, and there'll be more marketing opportunities for you in the agriculture industry, because at the end of the day, I fully believe, just seeing what you farmers have done over the last 40 years, there isn't every widget does not have a supply chain that has the opportunity the agriculture has today. So I do think that we have a real chance in the agriculture industry to differentiate ourselves from other products over the next 3 and the next 5 years. But it takes coordination across the whole supply chain. It takes farmers and third-party grain handlers and processors and grain handlers and downstream customers as well to be coordinated and aligned to make sure that it makes sense at every piece of the supply chain. But I will end with that. Thank you, everybody, for giving me a chance to speak.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think we're going to kick off into questions. We've got a few that have come through chat. I think, yeah, we're going to work on getting everybody's faces right up front here so the crowd can see us. So it looks like our first question came from Megan Baskerville. And as I'm asking everyone's questions from chat, please feel free, if I butcher your question, to hop off mute and add some color there. So Megan was asking, this is specifically for Caitlin, what specific biodiversity metrics does PepsiCo utilize to judge success in any particular supply shed?
Great question. I'd say also an area of tremendous opportunity to have, ways to measure biodiversity that are accessible, easy for farmers to use, kind of get at the right things. I feel like as an industry, my take is I don't think we've quite gotten there yet, right? And I think there's opportunities to really develop something that's better. But kind of current state, we use the biodiversity metrics, that are embedded within the Cool Farm tool and Field to Market's Field Print Calculator. Each of our implementers kind of have their own discretion around which tools they choose to use for quantification purposes. As an example, the Field to Market's Field Print Calculator, their biodiversity metrics are based around the habitat potential index. So they look at that kind of that potential for a given piece of land to provide wildlife habitat, whether that's water or land, and then score it on a 0 to 100 range. It's not perfect. The Field to Market team is actually working on some, I think, really exciting updates to that biodiversity metric that will be coming out next year. So it's a great question. There's lots of work underway. We've got, some ways of doing this now, and I think we're excited about continuing to kind of refine those going forward. I don't know, Paul, if you would add anything from your side.
No, you hit it on the head. Our programs in the U.S. With PepsiCo uses Field to Market's Habitat Potential Index. It's more qualitative or quantitative than we would like. We would like a little bit more qualitative metrics. So I think you're really in early days of biodiversity, Megan. Versus carbon scoring, it's a little bit more advanced, versus even water quality scoring, it's a little bit more advanced. So I think there's work that we really have to do. But the Habitat Potential Index is an index from 0 to 100%. We try to target over 80% of our regenerative agriculture programs to be an 80% type of threshold that goes into that Habitat Potential Index. But I would say we're in early days. So you have 2 to 3 years worth of data using that type of index. But I think there is absolutely an improvement opportunity around biodiversity. And I think that's really critical in storytelling and market creation, of feeling comfortable about what the overall results are. So that's a big piece that needs to be advanced in almost every critical sector of sustainability, of which biodiversity is one of them.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'll take the next question here. This is for both of you. What would you say is the biggest challenge for your company in meeting your in-field goals?
Caitlin, you want me to go first, or would you like to go first?
Sure, no, go for it.
First off, there's a ton of
Good question.
challenges. Tori, I wake up nervous every single day. That being said, proud of the amount of engagement that we've had over the last 2 or 3 years. The first one is just the number of conversations that are needed. This is brand new. Tori, you know as well as anybody else, the average number of conversations that are needed for the farmer to feel comfortable about enrolling in a program is not one, it's 3 or 4 different touch points. And there's several different questions that need to be answered of what information are you asking for? Is my data secure? Why are you doing this? What is the future opportunity? How can I potentially receive more funding? What is my carbon intensity score? So we want, ultimately you want to scale up to get to impact, and sometimes you have some inefficiencies. If we're only talking to a group of 5 to 6 farmers, it's a little bit easier, but ultimately you want to have that conversation with as many farmers as you possibly can. And there is a learning curve that's needed within the supply chain as well. Like the amount of ADM folks that could have this conversation 3 years ago was maybe 2 or 3. Now I'd like to think that it's 100 plus to be able to answer all those questions that farmers ultimately ask. So I think that's like number one hurdle, is making sure you have partnerships. Calls like this are just phenomenal, of being able to just tell the story. Nobody's trying to hold back any information or not being transparent. It's just making sure that we have the right avenue to tell the story. So like number one is just education in general, internally and externally, as well. And then I think innovation is like number 2. And when I say innovation, a cover crop doesn't work on every field. Everybody knows that. Being on 100% of your crop sometimes could have a real productivity concern that could have us go backwards. And we know that the agriculture industry has been super innovative with different products, different biologicals, different crop protection products, different technologies, that like staying ahead of that curve and understanding the sustainable impacts around technology and products is something that isn't just done in a year. And most of the time, even though we'll get like university research type of feedback on a new product or a new technology, there's nothing better than farmer feedback, like practical feedback of what worked on the farm as well. So the more information we can get on that side, I think the better we are on progressing forward. Because I always make the statement, the way that our regenerative agriculture program looks today, that looks the exact same 5 years from now, probably failed. There's a lot of work that goes into between now and 5 years. So like the 2 big hurdles I'll say is like just making sure that we're open and we're transparent. We're answering all the questions in an efficient way and having as many conversations as you possibly can. And then 2, staying ahead of the innovation curve and talking to farmers about what's working on that farm. Because at the end of the day, if it doesn't work in the farm, it's not going to work for anybody. And understanding those complexities and sharing those complexities with market. I'm going to add a third one too. I know I've spent a lot of time talking about commercial opportunities because I do fully believe I know why everybody is doing this. Farmers are doing it to maintain the soil health of their land so they can pass it on generation to generation. ADM and PepsiCo is doing it for the right reasons as well. That being said, we can't ignore, like, there has to be a commercial opportunity. There has to be a financial opportunity across the whole supply chain to turn it from a compliance exercise to a commercial exercise. And I do think there is a lack of understanding from the average consumer on the complexities of how hard it is to farm. I mentioned a little bit earlier, my brother and my brother-in-law don't farm or farm. I'm not one of those. I have a story that I can share with people about how I was fired from the farm, but it's complex. I know it firsthand how complex it is and all the great work that the farmer is doing. I don't think your average consumer understands that, but I think they value it. I think they want transparency. They want a smaller impact on the overall environment, and us working together to be able to educate the consumer, I think, is really critical of the good work that's being done in the field. Long answer, but those are my 3, Tori.
Completely agree. I think a lot of common threads I would add. So yeah, one, I would just say exactly as Paul was saying, I think like this work has to be hyper local, right? As we've both said, and that is really labor intensive. It doesn't scale easily. And so we really got to be kind of in this for the long run. And one of the things that I think keeps us up at night is it's really, for us at least, it's really dependent on finding those fantastic, innovative, trusted partners who can do this work locally. And, you know, those organizations have to be able to sustain themselves, right? And they have to be able to kind of grow and scale at the pace, right, of kind of the level of ambition that we have. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can support our partners beyond kind of that direct, engagement that we have around the farmer incentive programs, because I think this all relies on like really fantastic local people who have really great relationships. And I think it all kind of, rises or falls kind of on that back. And then I think connected to that too, I do think, there are like one farmer has one bad experience, right? And it can really kind of turn them off long term. And so how do we, again, really make sure that our offerings are just of really high quality and really giving folks the support that they need so that it is a good experience and that they feel like they're able to keep at it. I think that's something that we worry about. I think we've seen good results there, but I think we are getting to the point where there's a lot of different offerings out there around incentive programs. And I think sometimes we hear stories of things that haven't gone as well. And so I think that's something we worry about. And I think connected to that too, something we get involved in, and, as does ADM and others, is really trying to work pretty competitively as an industry to, as much as possible, all be, marching in the same direction around these programs, right? Because like we know it can get quite confusing, right, with this whole array of different offerings out there. And I do think, frankly, just that confusion can be a bit of a barrier to taking action, very understandably, right? And so I think we all have a role to play, and I think we're all investing there with others in trying to make things, simpler, less confusing, and try to be really aligned as companies in the way that we're going about this work. And then I'd say too, really connected to a lot of things that Paul was saying, I just think there's a huge obligation to keep learning and keep evolving within our programs. Like, this is not a set and forget out to 2030 already. If we just look at how much things have evolved in the last couple of years around regenerative agriculture, we're in a very different spot. And so we're going to have to just, maintain flexibility and continue to really listen to what we're hearing from farmers and be able to kind of pivot and adapt over time.
Awesome, thank you. I do have, just to build on something that Paul had said, a quick question for Tori, actually. Paul, you mentioned just the amount of conversations that this takes. I feel like every single time I talk to Tori, he's like, oh shoot, I gotta go. An ADM regenerations farmer is calling me, or I have to call an ADM regenerations farmer. Like, Tori, in the last 2 years, could you estimate how many phone calls you've had with farmers in the ADM program?
I would ballpark it in the hundreds. Let's put it that way. Yeah, at least several hundred conversations. So some 3, 4, 5 minute conversations, others 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, and that's just a single program. I mean, it's all of us in conservation can attest to that. It's an incredible amount of conversations and highly nuanced conversations as well. So then building kind of on what the biggest challenge is, what to both of you, what would you say like the biggest maybe surprise has been? Like, this took off more than you thought, or this was easier or harder than you thought. What's the biggest surprise to rolling out some of these in-field programs?
I can go first. So when the one thing, like from an ADM perspective, whenever we ask for more, like we're very conscious of understanding like the pushback that ultimately can come from farmers, no matter what it is. And I think that was probably like our number one concern over those 7 to 10 years of when we were in our fact finding mission. And then when we scaled up our efforts was still a little bit of a concern. Of okay, we're gonna ask you questions about your farm operation that we haven't asked ever, and there's always like still those initial concerns, but the biggest surprise is how appreciative I think farmers are of us caring and potentially incentivizing some of the decisions they've made, especially when it comes to early adopters, because a lot of the early adopters around cover crops, like there wasn't like a private entity that was going along that journey with them. They were taking on that productivity or cost concern on their own for sustainability type of reasons. But the feedback that we've got of enjoying that extra collaboration and coordination was a pretty big surprise to me, to be completely honest with you. And I'm not saying that's widespread, but it's significantly higher than what I expected. That was one. Another one was how many people were willing to help us along this journey as well, from the type of partnerships that we've had to that we've obtained over the last couple of years as well, and how excited everybody is about the work that's ultimately getting done. I think those are probably the two big surprises. One, just asking a little bit more intimate information from farmers, and then seeing a positive reaction to that rather than a negative reaction to that for the most part, was a big one. And then, how many different resources and how many people are willing to help across the ag supply chain as well is probably the second biggest surprise.
Yeah, I think those are good ones. I'd say, and I don't know, it's maybe not a surprise to this audience, but it's, I think maybe just a learning that we continue to see, just both in terms of enrollment in the various partnership programs that we have, but also in just feedback that we get from farmers when we're out on field, is that you of course have to have incentive payments as part of your program. But what we consistently hear is, the money is not what compels someone to do this, right? It's got to be there, but that is not, at the end of the day, what is kind of bringing somebody to the table. They're really looking holistically at what the entire program offers. And so I just think that continues, that's the reason why we really focus on partnering with folks who are really going to be providing that whole farm support. And it's even interesting, I think we sometimes, amongst some of the different programs that we have, we've seen situations where, some of our offerings that actually offer the lowest kind of per acre incentive program have had the easiest time with recruitment and enrollment. And so I just think that continues to be something that intrigues me. The other thing that's been interesting to me lately, stepping outside of, I also, as part of my role, cover the work that we're doing in Canada, which is newer for us as a company. And we've been just starting to work up in the Canadian prairies, focused on our oat and canola sourcing. And it's been so interesting to expand to a new geography for us in doing this regenerative ag work, and actually see how much just kind of latent interest there was in these kind of programs. We've been just absolutely overwhelmed by the amount of interest in signing up for our program this year. So I just think that's been a fun and kind of exciting surprise to see as we look at other regions and how we can support folks in other places. Just some of that kind of pent up interest when you get out there and start talking to folks and offering something locally.
Great, thank you. This is a question in the chat from Matt. I'm a landowner and farmer in southern Indiana, doing all I can in the regen ag and biodiversity realm. I have 350 acres of row crops and 350 acres in forest, wetland, and wildlife habitat. How do I connect with a buyer that cares as much about taking care of the land as I do?
Yep, I can take that one. And I can speak from an ADM perspective. I won't be able to speak from other companies' perspective, but a lot of the issues that we have today, just from a grain buyer perspective, is what I maybe alluded to in my last response, is that there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of technical components, there's a learning curve associated with this from our employees, just like there is, the market as a whole. That I don't know if it's that they don't care, it's that they don't understand. The one thing that we are trying to do right now is, last year we held an internal, what we call a sustainability academy, where we educate our workforce on what sustainability is and what regen ag programs are. Last year, I think we trained over 500 different employees, of which the majority of them were farm originators and grain buyers as well, to where they at least feel a little bit more comfortable on having the conversation around sustainability and regen ag and what our offerings are. But when you look at ADM's overall structure around regen ag programs, we have like our core team that is myself, and then we have 4 different climate smart origination managers. One of yours is Noah Ratty. If you have not got a chance to talk to Noah Ratty, he is your Indiana representative. He is phenomenal, Matt. Also, Zoe Wilson just started in Evansville, Indiana. If you're in Southern Indiana and you deliver to any of those Evansville, Indiana regions, Zoe Wilson interned for us last summer. She went to the University of Illinois, did great, talked to a lot of farmers. Now she started in Evansville. Very passionate about sustainability, very passionate about regen ag as well. She'd be a great contact specifically in that office that I can promise you will care as much as, maybe not as much as you, it's your land, but one tier under as much as you about your sustainability practices. But we're trying to educate our overall workforce to where they're at least comfortable about having the conversation. Because right now it's a lot of like, just like anybody that's working any job, it's really hard to have a conversation when you're not able to answer all the questions. And I'm guessing Matt would have some really good questions for us, and they want to make sure that they're comfortable first. So start with the Sustainability Academy. It's going to expand to having more specialized people that can have that conversation. That includes Noah Ratty, who also comes from a farm background in Indiana and is as passionate about the subject matter as any. Zoe Wilson as well. Those would be a couple of my contacts. And I don't think we're alone from an ADM perspective on at least understanding and getting excited about these programs. I'm guessing our peers in the industry are doing the same thing, but those are 2 specific examples in Indiana of people that you can reach out to.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I've got 2 questions here that I'm going to try to combine from chat, not directed to any particular person. So, and you both can see comments from Luke and Kevin that I'm going to try and get the spirit of those questions. So, and I think this echoes a lot of farmers. This echoes, I think, what we've felt on our farm sometimes as well. So, Kevin or Luke started that he feels that a lot of programs that focus on credits for biodiversity, carbon, cause a lot of growers to be turned off that have been doing these practices for a long, long time. And Paul, you kind of mentioned some of that already. He wanted to know, what progress has been made on looping those longtime adopters into programs. And then Kevin had agreed, just saying that he's been doing cover crops for a long time, 100% no-till. And that they're always, he's always got somebody talking to him about trying to sign him up for a program, but then they go to the farm a mile down the road who just does it for 1 year and they'll pay him double. So, he even mentioned ideas like paying per bushel produced, or using like the STAR program. What are your thoughts on the future of what this looks like for long-term adopters, especially?
Great question. Get the question quite often. Let me start with the why, or at least what I think the why is. A lot of the carbon related type of programs in the agriculture space have been built off of forest type of carbon credit type of programs. That is apples and oranges. When you're talking about growing trees, that is growing a tree and going away for 30 years versus practices that you have on the field that is an annual decision that comes with annual productivity and annual cost. That being said, the market opportunity specifically around carbon credits tries to define an intervention as something that is tributary to the financial incentive that you have. So when a certain amount of time passes, it's not qualified as intervention. I will tell you that probably the 2 biggest advocates of trying to like debuff this issue, which is a #1 issue in the agriculture supply chain of, especially when you come to cover crops, when there's only 6% of farmers that are planting cover crops today, you are not at a critical mass, and those 6% have got to be able to talk to other farmers to be able to adopt the practices on what the best practices ultimately are. 2 biggest advocates are probably ADM and PepsiCo for being able to incentivize early adopters. Now you're going to tell me I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth because we have an incentive that is $10 an acre for anybody that's over 5 years, $15 an acre, and $25 an acre within 5 years. There's one other added complexity to that type of payment, and that's the allowance of getting USDA funding around those type of incentives as well. So can't be in a USDA program in the 25 or the 15, can be in the $10 an acre type of program. But the overall conclusion is today, market opportunities tends to divide intervention when it happens within the next 2 or 3 years. I do think that changes. I do think we have an opportunity to change what the overall commercial opportunity is by being able to describe the difference between agriculture land and forestry land as well, that it is an annual decision. And you are seeing people, I know Tori has shared this with me multiple times, that don't do cover crops after a couple, 3 years because of the cost or the productivity risk that's associated with it. That you could still define an intervention if a farmer's been doing it for a long time. Plus, we don't want to hear what I know the common response is going to be that I'm not going to plant cover crops for 3 to 4 years. Then I can have the intervention component like a few years after that. There's still work to be done. But I ultimately think we get to that when we're able to kind of describe that it is an annual decision. There is an annual productivity and cost concern with it. I will say also, you're just looking at the cover crop payment, it's 10, 15, 25 from an ADM perspective. All of our other programs do not take that into account. We have a carbon intensity payment that pays you a premium per bushel. And it doesn't matter if this is the first year you've had that fertilizer efficiency program that had your score at 14 or 18 pounds per bushel, or if it's the 10th year, additionality is not required. All of our wheat payments as well, additionality is not required. Cover crops, we would like eventually to get to that point as well, to where it doesn't have that 10 to 15 to 25. I hear it. I know it is a concern. I know it is annoying. We're working on it to try to be able to flatline that as well, because we see it, but we need a little bit of, like Caitlin talked a little bit about, like the pre-competitive nature. The most important part of the pre-competitive nature is aligning on standards, methods, and methodologies to be able to account for the impacts. We do not have that alignment. A carbon credit market looks completely different than a supply chain inset program. One of our North Stars is this international GHG protocol that says how you can account for your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. They've not published that. They're going to publish that the first quarter of next year, but we're trying to push that allows for standardized models and methodologies that you can ultimately use to make the claims that you need to make. There is like one like underlying maybe issue or concern that the soil only has so much carbon storing capacity. That may be like a real concern that happens as well, that at a certain point in time, you've maxed out what your soil organic carbon is, your carbon sequestration. So you kind of have to identify when it started. But we hear you, we understand it. We're doing everything that we can to try to equalize that and maximize dollars at the farm if it's not worth it as well.
Paul, I think you nailed it. Yeah, it's a huge issue. I also hear it all the time. When we talk to farmers, it's exactly as Paul said, it's the reason why the programs that we support don't have an additionality requirement associated with them. That's not like, we have a value that we want to be able to support those who have been at this for longer, right? It doesn't make sense, right, to only reward kind of those medium or late adopters. And we are working to provide our point of view to a lot of those international bodies that Paul mentioned that get into, writing the rules of the road around how companies can account for these things. We have found a way, right, as a company to be able to talk about and account for work that we're doing through these pay for practice type programs. And so we're putting those things forward. And so I think optimistic, yeah, exactly as Paul said, that that this will change in the future. But yeah, huge issue. Couldn't agree more. And exactly the reason why I think, yeah, both companies on the call have very intentionally chosen to not structure our programs around additionality.
The one thing I want to highlight before we close the loop, agree with everything Caitlin said. ADM and PepsiCo are the minorities in this thought process of the additionality. You have a lot of other entities or even other downstream customers that are like, they want that intervention component, that it is the first time. But just wanted to highlight that as well, as that we're telling the story, but that doesn't necessarily represent the whole market. And we're fighting the good fight, but just to understand that there are conflicting opinions in the subject matter as well.
All right, I think we probably have time for one more. Frank, you agree?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, we'll go ahead, and this is a question from Gene. Caitlin mentioned that farmers don't always recognize the connection between their field and Pepsi products like a bag of Doritos. I'm guessing this limits Pepsi's ability to influence or increase adoption of conservation practices. What can be done to help make that connection for farmers, given the goal is providing a more sustainable product to Pepsi and or ADM?
Yeah, great question. Also an area of tremendous opportunity, I would say. I think some of the things that are helping with this are, honestly more doing things like this, right? Just kind of getting out there and talking to folks, sharing the why, kind of sharing what we're up to. We also try to spend a lot of time just out, talking to farmers, meeting folks and kind of making that connection, right, across the supply chain. We, and actually we just did a visit with some of our senior executives internally a few weeks ago, really focused on the potential opportunity we've got to like talk more about the work that we're doing on our products, or kind of tell more stories. Paul talked a lot about kind of that missing link to consumers. We definitely see that. I think we're trying to figure out the right way to do that. These things are complex and complicated and not always super easy to like wrap up on the back of a bag of chips or whatever it might be in a way that's gonna resonate and not feel like greenwashing and not feel confusing. But we've definitely got an obligation to do more and to kind of make that connection. So I think Gene, you're hitting on an area that is top of mind for us. I think we're not doing near enough on it right now. But I think, just continuing to have these conversations to get on and explain why we're doing this work, and to have that dialogue, with farmers about what they're experiencing and kind of make those connections is the right way to do it. And then I think more and more thought, about how we kind of talk to the public and how we talk to consumers as well.
Paul, any thoughts on that?
The only thing that I'll add to it is out of ADM, but I think a Doritos brand is a bigger brand than an ADM brand is, and I know how impactful it could ultimately be. And I do think we could do a significantly better job of relaying those messages as well, of who's specifically supporting these programs and what regions tend to have a little bit of overlap, so it gets a little conflicted in some regions. But if you're at Farm Progress Show, you're at any of our events, we do have like the PepsiCo's got a nice little one pager that kind of summarized what Caitlin talked about a little bit today, about why they're doing this, the different programs that they're funding. That I think that is a huge opportunity in this space, because that's one thing that we do see in almost every farmer visit. When Caitlin or other companies come over to farmer visits and we do connect that supply chain, it does feel like it's more impactful than like a carbon credit program that could go to a technology company or a company that hasn't essentially been buying agriculture ingredients for the last 100 years. So we try to do it in small scale today in farmer meetings. It could probably be done in a larger scale. That's something that we just need to work on.
I think there's been an attitude amongst companies of a focus on like the story doing versus the storytelling over the last several years, which makes sense, right? We want to like make sure we've got credible programs that are up and running before we go out there and start talking a lot about these things, right? But now I do think, we've hit a spot where it's time to share more and kind of make those connections.
Awesome. And thanks to you both. We really appreciate your time today coming here and asking questions. I did note there just in chat, we did have a few more questions roll in, and we may just divvy some of those out, or in the last 5-10 minutes we have here, if either of you wants to hit some of those questions. Looks like we've just got some questions on a bushel premium, those kinds of things. So unfortunately, we do have to move on to the next section here and hand off to Helen just to show show off a new ISAP tool that we are offering to producers to help cut through some of the noise of payment programs. So whenever you're ready, Helen.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Excited to share our new tool that we developed to kind of help answer some of these questions. We are seeing a lot of new programs come online with the Climate Smart Commodity funding in Illinois, and then also just the host of existing programs. And we hear from farmers all the time that it's hard to understand what programs are available, what programs they're eligible for, and kind of find the program that works best for them. So I'm going to share my screen here and just do a walkthrough of ISAP's new financial incentive database, or FIND tool as we're calling it. So this is ISAP's website, ilsustainableag.org. You can navigate to it right there from our homepage. And I'll just call out our URL is ilsustainableag.org/FIND tool. I think Rachel will also drop it in the chat. And the FIND tool includes information for over 60 programs that are available to farmers in Illinois. And this first page helps you kind of narrow in on what programs are most applicable to you. So the programs are all tagged by their eligibility in states and also in Illinois counties. So for this little exercise, we'll choose Macoupin County. You can select what type of operation you're running. So whether it's livestock, row crop, or specialty crops. Again, those programs are tagged. And then all of the programs are tagged with which type of practice they are funding. And so we have these in sort of larger categories and then also sort of broken down into more specific practices. So if we're looking for programs that a row crop farmer in Macoupin County is interested in getting paid to plant some cover crops, we just select those 3 targets and hit submit. Again, there's about 60 programs in the database, and this page kind of lays them all out. So I think if we counted these up, there's probably 25 to 30 cover crop programs, which is sort of expected, right? We're seeing, we all know the benefits of cover crops. We're seeing a lot of programs paying farmers to implement those practices. So the program list has the title of the program, a little bit of the overview, a list of other eligible practices that program pays for. And then to learn more, each program has its own program page, which we'll look at in a second. I do just want to call out these icons over here on the left. So we were intentional about trying to call out where each program is getting its funding source from. And there's a little icon here at the top. So programs that are capturing or claiming a farmer's carbon asset have a little leaf. So farmers can decide, I want to participate in a carbon program, or I'm not interested in participating in a carbon program. It's easy to see, which programs those are. Same thing for government programs that are receiving public funds. The Climate Smart Commodity programs are sort of inherently this combination of government and private funding. Some of those programs are claiming carbon assets and some aren't. So we wanted to also be able to distinguish between those. So if you're a farmer and you're looking for a program, there's a long list here. We can pick on our 2 guests here and select ADM, and PepsiCo should be down here if we scroll down far enough. There's a function where we can compare 2 selected programs and just see them side by side. So again, this page has a little bit more information, overview, geography, where they're available, information on length of contract, again, those eligible practices, what additionality requirements there are, information about payment. And you'll see that some of the information is not exactly side by side, same format and that kind of thing. But all the information was provided by the programs and has sort of been vetted by them. So it's just, we think it's helpful to see 2 that you might be interested side by side. And then each program also has its own specific page. And this page has, again, more information than the last 2. So there's information on when the program started and more information about farm eligibility. more information about payment schedule and price, contracting, and technical info. And this page can be easily printed, so you can get all that information in a hard copy if you'd like it. And I'll also just mention you can direct back to the program page. All of the programs on this Learn More button, as well as on the program page, has a button to visit the website. So you can click and go directly to ADM site, get in touch with somebody from that program to find out more information. And disclaimer, we always like to say when we're talking about these tools or these directories is that ISAP is not promoting any one specific program. We really just want to make the information available to farmers so that they can find out what they're eligible for and make the decision for which is the best program for their farm. So we encourage people to take it for a spin and find out which programs are you're eligible for. And we're happy to hear any feedback about the functionality of the tool or kind of what you're finding. Happy to answer any questions, although I know today we're kind of out of time, but feel free to send us an email or follow up afterwards. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, we're really excited about that tool, especially as programs develop over the years. As you can see, that side by side is a really helpful tool. Okay, so if we can put up the last slide now. So we do have CCA credits for all of you. So please take advantage of that. Again, if you don't have the app, right along the bottom there, you can see Rachel's email. Please just send her an email, and in the next few days, likely now that the conference is over, she should be submitting those, and you'll get those credits then. Again, we appreciate all of you joining and learning about this conference. And if you do have any suggestions, please do let us know if you have any ideas for future ISAP programming or the next conference that we have. Please do let us know. We always love suggestions for content or speakers, that kind of thing, because all this is really for you. As you can see there is a poll, just a follow-up poll. So please do go ahead and take that while you're getting your CEU credits in. Okay. And so, yeah, as those answers are rolling in, just a huge thanks to all again for attending. We appreciate your participation. And yeah, all feedback is great because we do try to cater this content to you all. Just as a reminder, all of these sessions and a ton of ISAP other resources are uploaded to both our website and to our YouTube page. So you should be able to review these at a later date. So with that, I think we'll close. And just again, thanks everybody for tuning in.